The Walt Disney Company recently announced that current chairman of the board, Mark Parker of Nike fame, would be stepping down in favor of his replacement and successor as new chairman, Mr. Gorman, who came from Morgan Stanley, somebody that was just recently installed to the board within the last year. Now, a lot of people are speculating what the implications of this are, why this may have happened. Well, I've got plenty of thoughts to share on that, including this news that is not really news, but at the same time, there is some news to it, of how Bob Iger is going to be naming his successor in early 2026. Yeah, we've got to discuss this because there are some nuances to this that we love to tear apart. And, well, some of them might just surprise you. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Let's talk about this Disney thing, because I'll be honest with you, when I saw this a couple of days ago, I didn't care. Honestly, I thought this was much ado about nothing. But I do want to talk about it. I didn't think it was worth my time. I didn't want to get up and make a video on this when this whole issue about 2026, right? Y'all come here to hear the truth on this stuff. And as much as I could sit here and I'd love to, hey, I can make a video and light this up like it's something spectacular. Honestly, it really isn't. It's nothing that we didn't know before, except for, of course, the twist specifically about Disney getting a new chairman. That's a different thing, but that's more about, like I said earlier in the program, that's more about Mark Parker and Nike than it is about Disney, in my opinion. When it comes to this whole issue about, well, we have somebody new, Mr. Gorman from Morgan Stanley, or formerly of Morgan Stanley, who's going to take the chairman of the board position at the Walt Disney Company. Okay. Yeah, Mark Parker's out. He was the guy, Mark Parker was the guy they brought in because Disney wanted a new connection to China. We need to get our movies back in there. Mark Parker took the chairman role, and what happened? As soon as he was named a successor chairman to Susan Arnold, all of a sudden, Disney was getting movies into China again. Remember? Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. And then China went back and said, hey, we'll even take Wakanda Forever from a couple of months ago. Those movies didn't do so great. It's not a whole lot that's doing great in China from Hollywood right now. Mark Parker didn't really turn out to be what they hoped. And also the other reality is that Nike, the company that Mark Parker actually is supposed to be running, that one isn't doing so hot either. Nike is a mess. And they have been a mess. They're one of the worst performing blue chip stocks out there of the last couple of years, like Disney is. So it's not exactly like Mark Parker has a great track record right now of chairing blue chip companies. But obviously, I think a conversation was had and it went something like this. Mark, we're going to need you to make a decision. We can't have you splitting your time and attention. Nike is already having enough problems. We don't want you wasting time over at Disney. That's Bob Iger's problem. And that's how we are where we are now. And so now we have Gorman coming from Morgan Stanley, who had, according to news reports, some good success recently of finding and appointing and passing along the business to his own named successor, which is what Iger tried to do with Chapek. But of course, we all know that part of the problem with Bob Chapek was the fact that Bob Iger wouldn't shut up and go away. So if you're major stockholders of Disney and you want to make sure that this problem doesn't happen again because you're tired of looking at your stock and it's still sitting at roughly the same level it was several years ago, and your dividend really isn't anything to talk about anymore, and you've watched other companies and you've watched the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ go through the roof since 2020 and 2021, and you're sitting there on your Disney stock with your thumb in your butt, not getting anything, and you're watching failure after failure after failure, and now, oh, by the way, the parks aren't going to do so hot. There was probably some pressure brought to bear behind the scenes. because it's clear that Bob Iger, honestly, has no interest in finding a successor. I've said this for years. There's no interest after he came back. And it was made clear not 6 to 7 months later when they got rid of Bob Chapek and Bob Iger came back. And they contracted Bob Iger through the end of when? This year, 2024. Bob Iger should be walking out of Disney with a successor already having been named right now. Right now. We should be 2 months away from a new CEO at the Walt Disney Company. But surprise, we're not. Because Bob Iger is going to Bob Iger. Because Bob Iger is Bob Iger. It's the Bob Iger Company. Just like the little emoji that we have on this channel. It's not the Disney Company. It's the Bob Iger Company. 7 months after he returned abruptly, right, in late 2022, almost 2 years ago now next month. 7 months later, Bob Iger was inexplicably renewed for another 2 years beyond where he was supposed to leave in 2 months from now. So Bob Iger was now on board as of the summer of 23. He was locked in through the end of 2026. Wow. Yeah, that's not somebody that sounds like they were bringing back that had the intention of actually finding a successor, does it? It isn't that hard. I'm sorry, it's not. The problem with Bob Iger is he wants to make sure he finds somebody that will do whatever he commands be done at Disney from beyond the grave. This is why Bob Chapek had to go, as we've discussed many times, because Bob Chapek, as Bob Iger found out too late in his mind, Bob Chapek had his own ideas about running Disney. And Iger thought Chapek was going to be a good little lieutenant and do whatever Iger told him to do even after he left. Bob Iger has a serious ego problem. He's a narcissist, and he's an egomaniac. Why don't we already have a successor name now? Anybody? Somebody? No. Have no idea. Why? Because that's the facts around Bob Iger. He doesn't want one named. Now we have a new chairman coming in, James Gorman from Morgan Stanley. And he is the person that is supposed to be heading up the succession committee. Remember, a succession committee that was being headed up 2 years ago when Iger came back. The succession committee was supposedly started right after he returned, or at the worst by January of 23. A succession committee that apparently to this point has done nothing of any substantive value. Bob Iger doesn't have to stay through the end of 2026. I'm sure he could, if a successor was found, he could step aside and say, oh, look, I'm glad we found somebody ahead of schedule. I really want to get to retirement and enjoy my life. But he doesn't. What did they announce? They announced that Iger and Disney would name a successor in 2026. 2 years from now. Let me pull up one of the articles. Disney to name Bob Iger's successor in early 2026. Why not now? We're going to name Bob Iger's successor in early 2026. Why not now? We already know the list of candidates. It's blatantly obvious. I seriously doubt that there has been any legitimate effort made to go outside the company and find somebody who isn't from Disney that could actually help turn this company around. Because as I've stated many times, I don't think there is one damned soul inside of the Disney C-suite that is capable of fixing this dumpster fire right now. And if you want to be a Jim Cramer out there and think, oh, it's time to go buy more Disney stock, bye-bye, you're great. Proceed at your own peril, because I think you're probably an idiot. My opinion. A lot of these people, they don't understand how broken this company is and how much of a toxic culture and rot to the core there is inside Disney. It is a desperately broken company. But hey, why not name them now? We know who they are. They're Dana Walden, right? Who's probably going to be 99% sure at this point Dana Walden is going to take Bob Iger's job. Let's be frank. And the other 1% might be somebody like Josh D'Amaro, who's head of the parks. Now, short of Dana Walden having a total, complete meltdown between now and 2026, she'll be it. But why not announce her now? Bob Iger already has his mind made up. Or, and listen carefully, is something new happening? Gorman is now going to be the chairman of the Walt Disney Company, not Mark Parker. Gorman, to be clear, was somebody who was brought in, handpicked by Iger. They've known each other for a while. I mean, a lot of these Wall Street types run around together. Gorman, being the head of Morgan Stanley, would have had ample communication with guys like Iger and other Fortune 500 companies, blue chip CEOs from the Dow for many, many years. Does that mean the succession process up to this point has all been moot? One might be forgiven for thinking so, because now Gorman is going to be heading up this committee for succession. At first, Bob Iger was heading up the committee. Then Mark Parker was heading up the committee. Now James Gorman is heading up the committee. How many iterations of this committee are going to happen before we actually find somebody? Is Disney so bereft of life that we can't figure out who the next in line is after 2 years since Bob Chapek has been yeeted from the company? It's ridiculous. You don't want to do it before the presidential election? Fine, for whatever reason, because, I don't know, Dana Walden has to help out, her old buddy Kamala Harris. Then why not say we're going to announce a new successor at the annual shareholder meeting in 2025? It's right around the corner. It's about 6 months away from now. Why do we need to get all the way out to 2026? There's two things going on, I think. Number one is James Gorman, I think, is starting from scratch. And maybe, just maybe, there is the potential, the small potential now, given who Gorman has been with Morgan Stanley for years, and I think he probably gives less of a crap about maybe Iger's opinion than Parker did. And I'm not saying he's not listening to Iger, don't get me wrong. But Gorman he's not part of the entertainment industry. He's part of the Wall Street industry. He's not part of the retail industry like Mark Parker was. He's part of the Wall Street industry. He could potentially bring a very, very different and more independent perspective to this, something that could take Bob Iger off guard. And maybe that's already happened, meaning that I still think that Dana Walden is going to be the next CEO. But maybe, just maybe, that a guy like Gorman is going to give Disney a little bit better chance of finding somebody from outside. Or maybe just somebody not named Dana Walden. I think he's probably starting over. And I think, like I said, the big part of this is that Bob Iger just didn't want to leave. They could get rid of Bob Iger earlier than that. Bob Iger could waive. It's not like the board would terminate him early, fire him, quote unquote. But Bob Iger could voluntarily walk out. Hey, we've got a new CEO. Like I said, it's time for me to go. This is the right person. Let's move. No, Bob Iger wants to stay there. They're going to announce a new CEO sometime in 2026. But that doesn't mean that Bob Iger is going to leave that day. He's going to stay there all the way through the end of 2026, I promise you. I will be shocked if Bob Iger leaves, they say early 26, if he leaves nearly a year ahead of time. Short of him having some type of medical crisis or something along those lines. I don't know. But just remember, kids, he still has a 5-year pension consultancy deal after he leaves. So he still might keep his office. He still might keep his 2-shower office, just like he did when Chapek took over. Who knows? So this is where we are. I'm not going to read a whole hell of a lot into this right now because, again, I don't think there's a whole lot here. There's nothing that really surprised me. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.